At its peak, Revell was the biggest name in the plastic model kit industry. The company turned cheap polystyrene pellets into a multi-million-dollar empire that defined how an entire generation of American kids spent their weekends. Revell kits sat on the shelves of every Woolworth, every hobby shop, every department store in the country. Then, on January 10, 2018, the parent company filed for bankruptcy, and the entire Revell brand, every mold, every trademark, every copyright, was auctioned off for $3.9 million. Revell's obsession with cheap, accessible plastic assembly is the exact thing that built its fortune. But in the early 1940s, it was just a tiny operation in Hollywood, California, and plastic was nobody's idea of gold. A businessman named Louis Glazer founded a small firm called Precision Specialties during the war years. The company was a contract injection molding shop. It made parts for washing machines, nothing glamorous, nothing that hinted at what was coming. As the post-war economy opened up and American factories pivoted from military production to consumer goods, Glazer started steering the company toward toys. Precision Specialties began producing HO scale train sets, miniature buildings, dollhouse furniture, and pull toy cars. Somewhere in this transition, Glazer started stamping a new brand name on select products. He called it Revell, drawn from the French word for awakening. The real breakthrough arrived in the early 1950s. A British design firm called Gowland & Gowland had created a line of miniature 1/32nd scale antique car replicas called the Highway Pioneers. Glazer recognized the potential immediately. He struck a deal and flooded American retail with these kits, placing them prominently in Woolworth dime stores at a price of 69 cents each. That price point was everything. Suddenly, a kid with pocket change could walk into a store and walk out with a real scale model kit. The 30-car Highway Pioneers line sold massively, and Glazer drew a critical conclusion from the data. The future of the company was not in pre-assembled plastic toys. It was in unassembled, do-it-yourself kits. Before Revell, the vast majority of traditional balsa wood models were never even finished by the people who bought them because the skill barrier was so high. Revell's pre-molded plastic parts could be assembled in an hour with a tube of glue. That single insight changed the entire hobby industry. What comes next is the part that still doesn't make sense to collectors today. To capture full profit margins, Revell needed to stop relying on outside designers and engineer its own molds. The very first mold Revell designed, built, and owned was the USS Missouri battleship, released in 1953. The kit was engineered at 1:535 scale, an odd proportion that reveals a fascinating economic calculation. Early Revell executives used a concept called box scale. Instead of choosing a standard mathematical scale and building a box to fit the model, they picked a standard retail box size first, and then scaled the model to fit inside it. Shipping costs, warehouse stacking, shelf space, all standardized. The 1953 USS Missouri came packaged in a narrow cardboard box shaped like an oversized tube of toothpaste. And because the 4 Iowa-class battleships shared nearly identical hull dimensions, Revell squeezed even more revenue from that single mold by swapping out the decals, changing the box art, and reboxing the exact same plastic parts as the USS New Jersey. That's not a typo. Same plastic, different sticker, new sale. Aviation kits followed immediately. In 1953, Revell released its first 3 jet aircraft, the Lockheed F-94C Starfire, the Chance Vought F-7U-1 Cutlass, and the Grumman F-9 F-6 Cougar. These original kits were crude by modern standards. They had no landing gear, The pilot figures were molded directly into the fuselage. Surface detail was almost non-existent. Collectors now refer to this formative era, spanning from 1953 to approximately 1955, as the pre-S period. It was named because these kits were produced before Revell began advertising its proprietary S-type plastic cement on the box art that same year. Now, Revell could have dominated unchallenged. They did not. A fierce competitor named Monogram Models had been founded in Chicago in 1945 by two former Comet Kits employees, Jack Besser and Bob Reeder. Along with AMT and MPC, Revell and Monogram formed what the industry called the Big Four of plastic scale modeling. For 2 decades, the rivalry between Revell and Monogram fueled a golden age. Both companies poured money into increasingly complex steel molds, each trying to out-engineer the other. Revell had the bigger catalog. Monogram had the sharper fit and finish. The competition pushed the entire hobby forward. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic Ocean, Revell had planted a flag that would eventually save the brand from total extinction. In 1956, Revell established a German subsidiary called Revell Plastics GmbH, initially based in Bielefeld before relocating to the town of Bunde. At first, the German office was just a distribution hub, importing American-made kits and shipping them across Europe. But through the 1970s, Revell Germany began commissioning its own proprietary molds and developing kits tailored specifically to European military subjects. When the pioneering British model manufacturer Frog collapsed, Revell Germany bought its entire bank of German World War II aviation and armor molds. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. The same rivalry that pushed Revell and Monogram to greatness was about to work against both of them. By the 1980s, video game consoles and remote-controlled toys were pulling adolescent attention away from static plastic kits. The consumer base was shrinking. In 1986, a New York private equity group called Odyssey Partners bought both companies and forced them into a single entity called Revell Monogram. Odyssey fired massive portions of the Revell staff in California and relocated everything to Monogram's facilities in the Chicago suburbs. The Monogram team protested that their name should come first, since they had been the financially stable company before the buyout. It didn't matter. By 1987, the Monogram logo was demoted to a footnote beneath the Revell name on every box. The slow erasure of Monogram had begun. The newly merged company tried to fight back against digital entertainment, and the result was a disaster. Around 1993, Revell Monogram launched a product line called Power Modeler, a hybrid package that bundled a CD-ROM racing simulation with a physical plastic model kit of a high-end sports car. The Porsche 911, the Bugatti EB110, the Lamborghini Countach. The concept sounded innovative on paper. The execution was a catastrophe. Each kit retailed for roughly $70. Parents had no idea whether they were buying an expensive video game or an overpriced model kit. The product moved fewer than 50,000 units. The venture generated a $4 million loss in a single fiscal year before being scrapped entirely. That's the kind of number that makes accountants cry. In 1994, Hallmark Cards bought Revell Monogram for $85 million and tucked it inside the Benny and Smith division alongside Crayola crayons. The logic connecting complex scale military models to wax crayons never materialized. By the early 2000s, the company was flipped to Alpha International, then flipped again within a year to Gearbox Toys. 2 ownership changes in roughly 12 months. Nobody was investing in new molds. Nobody was planning long-term. While all of this was happening, Revell, Germany had been quietly building something durable. In September 2006, the German branch formally separated from the American parent company and began operating as a fully independent entity. For the first time, Revell existed as two separate companies sharing nothing but a name. That independence turned out to be a lifeline. In 2007, a massive Illinois-based hobby conglomerate called Habaco acquired the American Revell operations and officially dropped the monogram name forever. 5 years later, in 2012, Habaco reunited the American and German branches by buying Revell, Germany. On the surface, the brand looked whole again. Underneath, the financial structure was rotting. Back in 2005, Habaco had converted to employee ownership through a $200 million leveraged ESOP buyout, financed with $100 million in senior debt and $100 million in seller notes. Every acquisition after that, Revell, Estes Rockets, Axial, RC Cars, all happened inside this debt-loaded framework. You would think someone would have said something. Nobody did. The retail landscape was collapsing around them. Brick and mortar hobby shops were closing. Consumer drones were cannibalizing traditional RC airplane sales. The core plastic model builder demographic was aging out. Habaco needed massive continuous cash flow just to service the interest on the 2005 ESOP debt, and that cash flow was evaporating. On January 10, 2018, Habaco filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The filing was later converted to a full Chapter 7 liquidation. The piecemeal auction that followed told the entire story in dollar figures. Horizon Hobby bought the Great Plains RC division and Tower Hobbies distribution network for $18.8 million. The Langford Group bought Estes model rockets for $7 million. And on April 13, 2018, a Munich-based venture capital group called Quantum Capital Partners, operating through a shell company called Blitz 18313, purchased the entirety of Revell's global assets for exactly $3.9 million. Every trademark, every copyright, and every steel mold accumulated across 7 decades. The American tooling alone was estimated at roughly $3.5 million in raw steel value. On paper, Revell, Germany was bought for under $1 million. The U.S. tooling went for $50,000. Quantum Capital immediately installed the German management team at the Bunde facility as the permanent global headquarters. The original American branch, the company Louis Glaser built in Hollywood, was reduced to a small import warehouse. All product development, all engineering, all executive decisions now run through Germany. Modern Revell kits are manufactured primarily in Poland and in China. The vintage American molds that no longer fit the German product strategy were sold off to Atlantis Models, a small New York outfit specializing in retro reissues. The old Aurora molds, the Renoir Visible series, the earliest monogram tooling, all dispersed to niche manufacturers across the country. Louis Glaser called his brand Revell because the word meant awakening. By 2018, the entire company sold for less than the price of a suburban house. The boardrooms are gone. The debt is settled. The private equity firms have moved on. But the steel molds that Glaser commissioned in the 1950s are still pressing plastic today, stamped under different logos, boxed by different companies, sold in countries Glaser never exported to. The corporations did not survive. The molds did.